Hi, and I'm Erin. Welcome to the second video for We Learn Naturally. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the topics of bullying and exclusion. I've had a couple of parents ask me about this particular topic, and so I thought it's probably worth a post. So, exclusion and bullying, they're actually not necessarily the same thing. You could have a bully who uses exclusion as a tactic, but when kids are excluding, they're not necessarily doing it to be bullying. You kind of have to figure that one out a little bit more and find out more information. So, the one nice thing about a multi-age democratic group is that bullying instances are actually quite rare. Because it's a multi-age group, we tend to learn and to find that it's not as competitive. There aren't kids with the same skill sets who are competing for the same resources. So that's kind of nice to know that kids have a better chance of just sort of relaxing and just sort of embracing who they are right now instead of worrying about how they compare to those around them. We also find that in a democratic environment, the instances are lower because it is a democratic environment. Everyone gets a vote, everyone is respected, so the chances of having a bully are much lower because the power dynamics are more equal. So I've sort of touched on this already. Exclusion can actually, and I guess inclusion, that topic can be related to power dynamics, and sometimes kids will be experimenting with exclusion and inclusion as a way to explore that issue of power. It's normal for especially young kids, once they move on beyond parallel play, it's normal for them to explore that issue of power dynamics in a group. It can show up in lots of different ways, such as, who decides what game they're going to play, all the way over to who gets to play that game and what role they're going to play. And I think as adults, we've all sort of experienced inclusion and exclusion ourselves. And so while we might look at children and think, oh my goodness, kids are excluding one another, it's actually a dynamic that we experience as adults. And in fact, that might be why we have such a hard time when we see kids exploring that dynamic themselves. We know how painful it can be to be excluded. And I think a lot of us sort of instinctually want to protect our children from experiencing those painful emotions that we've had around that issue. I know also that a lot of kids today don't have the same opportunities that even I had growing up for play that was, I guess, had less adult interference, less adult interactions. Adults definitely change the play of children. Sometimes they can be helpful, and sometimes adults can change it in a way that is detrimental to kids' learning. So I'll give you a short little example. I was reading something from a private school director, and she was near retirement, and she said she's seen a lot of changes in her life as a private school director, but one of the biggest ones that she's noticed is that kids who are starting her school, and I think her school was ages 5 and up, she felt like a 5-year-old today is so much different than a 5-year-old 20 years ago. She feels like the 5-year-olds coming in today seem younger. And I think that's because a lot of kids haven't had those chances to practice playing together, negotiating. So they just don't have the same tolerance and the same skill set. Doesn't mean that we don't want to offer it to them and that we don't want to try to build that for them, but we have to be really conscious of how we do that. We want kids to feel empowered. We want kids to find their own voice. And as adults, if we're stepping in, we really take that opportunity away from them. My cats are playing around me right now. So while the issue of exclusion might be a real trigger issue for a lot of adults, it's important for us to be aware of that so that when we see that sort of situation happening with children, we can keep it in perspective. As I mentioned just now, we don't want to intervene because we actually want to give kids the opportunity to do that problem solving themselves. However, adults do play a valuable role. We want to make sure that kids are, I guess, moving in the direction of the kind of society that we want to see. So, if we're not going to jump right in and tell kids what to do, because that would be reinforcing the same power dynamic that we're trying to stop, what can we do instead? Well, I would recommend sportscasting to start. And that's just basically describing the situation as you see it, very calmly, no judgment involved. And then slowly, as you sort of get a sense of what the needs are from the kids, you can begin to add more if the kids need it. So, maybe that means sort of pointing out things more directly, maybe even offering suggestions if kids can't come up with the ideas on their own. I've also come across some really good books about how to talk about inclusion and exclusion, and while I love the idea of books, and my family loves reading books, especially at bedtime, I want to be careful about relying solely on books to be your teaching guide for inclusion and exclusion. While they can do a good job of sort of bringing up topics, I don't think that books can actually replace hands-on learning. So I actually think kids have to go through the process of thinking about exclusion, or perhaps even someone is excluded or feeling exclusion yourself, before you can really get a sense of what it means to be excluded and why it's so important to include others. I'm going to finish this video right here, but in my next video I'm going to share with you an example of exclusion and why experiencing exclusion isn't such a bad thing because it can lead to inclusion. Okay, thanks.